She said it while laughing. Not because she was happy, not because she was joking, but because she knew it would hurt. And it did. Like a slow stab right under my ribs. "You're only good for cleaning. You're nothing but a maid." Those words came out of my daughter's mouth like venom. Words soaked in spite, sharp as glass, careless as if I were a stranger on the street. She didn't flinch when she said it. Didn't blink. She just looked me dead in the eye and said it like it was the truth. Like it was something she had rehearsed for years and was finally letting loose. And the worst part is, she said it in front of people. I stood there, holding a plate in my hand, still warm from the oven. My fingers trembled slightly, but I kept my back straight, my face frozen in place. I didn't say a word, because in that moment, I felt something inside me collapse. Something too old, too tired, too broken to even fight back. A silence so loud I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. How did we get here? How does a mother become invisible to her own child? How does love so deep, so selfless, turn into disgust? I remember holding her the first time. Her skin was so soft I was afraid to touch her. Her cry was like a whisper, and I had made a silent promise to protect her. From pain, from hunger, from loneliness. I told myself I would carry her through this life if she ever got too tired. I told myself that no matter how hard it got, I'd never let her feel what I felt growing up. That she would never go to sleep hungry. That she would never hear her stomach growl during math class. That she would never know what it's like to carry guilt for simply existing. So I worked. God knows I worked. I cleaned houses while pregnant. I stood for 12-hour shifts on swollen feet, praying the baby inside me would grow strong despite the stress. I skipped meals, skipped sleep, skipped entire days of rest so I could save money for diapers and doctor visits. I smiled when I was dying inside. I nodded when I wanted to scream. I bit my tongue so many times I forgot how to speak up. And then she was born. And suddenly, none of that mattered. The pain, the exhaustion, it all disappeared the moment I saw her tiny face. Her eyes were shut tight like she was afraid to see the world. And I thought, maybe if I worked hard enough, I could make it a world worth opening her eyes to. But I was wrong. Because no matter how much I gave her, it was never enough. Not when she was 5 and wanted the same birthday cake her classmate had, but all I could afford was a homemade one with dollar store candles. Not when she was 10 and begged for a phone because everyone else had one, but we barely had money for rent. Not when she turned 13 and started comparing me to other moms. Moms who wore makeup. Moms who didn't smell like bleach and tired bones. Moms who picked them up in nice cars and not on foot with a grocery bag in one hand and a laundry basket in the other. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being her mother and became her shame. She stopped asking about my day, stopped saying thank you, stopped looking me in the eye. I became part of the background, the thing that did the chores, paid the bills, cooked the meals. I became useful, not loved, not respected, just used. And the more I gave, the more she took. I remember one winter when I caught the flu. My body was shaking. My head felt like it was full of nails, and I still got up to cook dinner. She came home, slammed her door, and yelled at me because there was no Wi-Fi. I was too dizzy to speak. She never even asked if I was okay. Years of this. Quiet disrespect. Quiet dismissal. Like I was slowly disappearing under the weight of my own silence. And then came that moment. That Sunday. That sentence. "You're only good for cleaning." That was the day I realized something dangerous. That love, when unreturned, doesn't just fade. It ferments. It rots inside you like a wound that was never stitched. And after enough time, it starts to stink. It poisons your mind, makes you question everything. Did she ever love me? Did she ever see me? Or was I just a pair of hands? There's something you need to know about women like me. We don't cry when it hurts. We don't yell when we're betrayed. We don't collapse when we're disrespected. We just get quieter, colder, emptier, until one day, there's nothing left to take. No more dinners on the table, no more folded laundry, no more waiting at the door when she comes home late. That day, I didn't say a word. I went to the kitchen. I washed the dishes. My hands were soaked in soap and shame, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Resentment. Real, raw resentment. Not just at her, but at myself. For letting this happen. For giving everything and demanding nothing. For letting her speak to me that way. For raising her to believe that love is slavery. I dried my hands. I walked to my room. And I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the same old shoes I had worn for years. And I asked myself something I had never dared to ask. What if I stopped? What if I stopped serving? Stopped caring? Stopped sacrificing? What would happen if, just once, I put myself first? Because the truth is, I was tired. Tired of being a ghost in my own home. Tired of pretending that love was supposed to hurt this much. Tired of bleeding for someone who would never even notice the stain. That sentence didn't just break my heart. It woke me up. My name is Lucia Helena dos Santos. I'm 63 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey. From the outside, my life probably looks ordinary, maybe even boring. I wake up at 5 every morning. I make myself a small cup of coffee, usually instant because it's cheap and fast. I sit by the window, sometimes just watching the sun rise over the rooftops. I put on my uniform, simple beige scrubs and old sneakers with soles worn down by years of use, and I walk to work. Every day, rain or snow, sickness or exhaustion, I go. I'm a caregiver. I take care of people most others forget. The elderly, the disabled, the dying. I help them bathe, feed them, change their clothes, give them their pills. Sometimes, I hold their hand just so they don't die alone. It's not glamorous. There are no thank yous in magazines for women like me. No standing ovations. No certificates of recognition. But I do it. Not because it pays well. It doesn't. Not because it's easy. It never is. I do it because somewhere, deep inside, I still believe people deserve dignity, especially when no one else is watching. That belief has shaped my entire life. I didn't grow up dreaming of becoming a caregiver. No little girl dreams of cleaning bedpans or massaging swollen legs. But life? Life doesn't care about your dreams. It hands you reality, raw and unfiltered. And you either learn how to live inside that reality, or you get crushed beneath it. I've been living in the shadows for as long as I can remember. Quiet corners, back seats, edges of rooms where no one looks twice. I've gotten used to the silence that follows me. I've grown familiar with the way people glance past me, like I'm furniture. It doesn't shock me anymore. What still shocks me, though, is how the people closest to you can be the ones who see you the least. I live alone now, in a one-bedroom apartment that I rent from a woman who lives upstairs. It's not much. The walls are thin, the heater makes strange noises at night, and there's a leak in the kitchen that no one seems in a rush to fix. But it's mine. My bed. My table. My peace. I keep everything tidy. Not just out of habit, but because it's the only place I have control. Sometimes, when I walk to work in the early morning, I pass by rows of big houses, 2-car garages, manicured lawns. I wonder what it's like to wake up in a place where everything smells new. Where you don't have to think twice before turning on the heater in winter. Where you can open your fridge and always find what you're craving. I don't envy them, but I do wonder. I wonder how different my life could have been if someone had just asked what I wanted, what I needed. My days are long, but they're predictable. Mrs. Fletcher needs her insulin shot at 6:30 sharp. Mr. Raymond likes his eggs scrambled, not fried. I have to remind Miss Carol to brush her teeth, otherwise she forgets and insists she already did it. They're routines that feel like second nature to me now. And in those small moments, when someone smiles because their back finally stopped hurting, or they say thank you with trembling lips, I feel something real, something whole. But even in those moments, there's an emptiness I can't fill, because while I'm taking care of everyone else, there's no one taking care of me. It's strange, the way people assume that if you're capable, you're not hurting, that if you keep moving, you must be fine, that if you don't complain, you must be content. But there are days when my hands ache so badly I can barely open a jar. Nights when the loneliness is so loud it feels like it's screaming through the walls. I used to talk to my daughter every day. She'd call during her lunch breaks, ask about my clients, laugh at something silly I said, But as the years passed, the calls stopped. The laughter faded. The love evaporated. Or maybe it was never really there. Maybe I mistook obligation for affection. Maybe I was so desperate to feel needed that I ignored the signs that she only saw me as a duty. She doesn't visit anymore. She lives less than 30 minutes away, but months go by without a word. Birthdays, holidays, all pass like regular days. I used to make excuses for her. She's busy. Work is stressful. She's tired. But I've come to realize the truth is simpler. She just doesn't want to come. Because in her eyes, I represent something she wants to forget. Struggle. Sacrifice. The part of her story that's not glamorous. There was a time when I wore my sacrifices like badges. I used to think they made me honorable, a good mother, a good woman. But now, they just feel heavy, like chains. I gave everything I had for her education, for her comfort. I worked double shifts to make sure she had lunch money. I skipped dentist appointments so she could have braces. I swallowed my pride and cleaned floors so she could stand tall in front of her friends. But what no one tells you is that when you raise someone to fly, sometimes they fly far away. So far, they forget who built the wings. Every corner of my life has her name written on it. Every wrinkle on my face holds a moment I chose her over myself. Every scar is a story she'll never ask to hear. But this morning, something shifted. As I was folding towels at work, the same way I've done 1,000 times before, I caught my reflection in the window. And for the first time in years, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. Not because she looked old, but because she looked erased. Erased by decades of silence, of service, of surrender. That's when I realized something devastating. I had become a background character in my own story. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to step into the center, even if it meant standing there alone. I was 13 when I first heard the words, "You have to grow up now." They didn't come from a teacher or a mentor or anyone who cared about my dreams. They came from my aunt, standing at the edge of my mother's hospital bed, holding a brown paper bag full of pills and responsibility. My mother had collapsed 2 days earlier. A seizure. The doctors said it was a complication from untreated hypertension. Her speech was slurred. Her hands shook. I remember sitting in that white room, surrounded by machines and wires, and hearing a nurse whisper that she might not be able to take care of herself anymore. And just like that, my childhood ended. There was no warning, no slow transition. One day, I was a girl who liked to draw flowers in the margins of her notebook. The next day, I was learning how to crush pills into applesauce and set alarms for medications I couldn't pronounce. I dropped out of school a week later. No one fought to keep me in class. No social worker came. No teacher called. It was like I vanished. And maybe I did. Maybe the version of me that existed before that hospital room was buried under layers of obligation, fear, and exhaustion. We lived in a 2-room shack behind someone else's house. Rent was paid in cleaning work. My mother had always been strict, silent, and proud. She didn't show affection easily. Her love came in the form of clean clothes and hot meals. But after the seizure, her body began to betray her. She couldn't walk without trembling, couldn't hold a spoon without spilling. Her words came out tangled, and with every day that passed, she needed more and more of me. At 13, I became the mother to my own mother. I bathed her, cooked for her, cleaned her sheets when she wet the bed. I remember the first time it happened. She cried. Not loud sobs, but a quiet, broken weeping that made me feel like I was watching a mountain crumble. She was humiliated, and I, just a girl, tried to be strong. I told her it was okay, that I didn't mind. But inside, I felt like I was being pulled underwater by emotions I didn't understand. We didn't have money for nurses or help, so I became everything. Nurse, cook, housekeeper, translator. I learned how to argue with pharmacists who refused to give her refills. I figured out how to make rice stretch for days. I taught myself how to mask the smell of sickness with vinegar and lemon peels. I stopped brushing my hair, stopped talking to friends, stopped dreaming. The only place I ever went was the corner store. And even then, I walked fast. afraid of what might happen if I wasn't home when she needed me. I used to look at the other girls through the window, laughing, talking about boys, wearing pretty sandals, and I felt something so sharp in my chest it made me sick. Not jealousy, grief. I wasn't mourning what they had. I was mourning the version of myself I would never become. My mother didn't thank me. Not once. At the time, I didn't understand why. I thought I was doing something wrong, that maybe I wasn't taking good enough care of her. But now I know the truth. She didn't thank me because she didn't know how. She had been raised in a world where survival was duty and love was silent. There were moments of softness, though. Quiet nights where she'd touch my hand with hers and whisper my name like a prayer. Those nights kept me going, made me believe that maybe, deep down, she saw me. Maybe I wasn't invisible to her after all. But love with her was never safe. Her illness didn't just break her body. It cracked her spirit. She became impatient, angry, controlling. If I left a towel in the wrong place, she'd scream. If I forgot a dose, she'd say I wanted her dead. The walls of our home were thick with tension. I tiptoed through every hour like I was walking across glass. And still, I stayed. I stayed through the night terrors when she'd wake up screaming. I stayed through the hunger when all we had to eat was toast and butter. I stayed when I got sick with fever and chills, and no one took care of me. I stayed when my period came for the first time, and I had to figure it out alone. I didn't have a choice. No one asked if I was okay. No one gave me a break. No one saw that a child was drowning in an adult's life. Looking back, I realize I wasn't just caring for her. I was trying to earn her love. I believed with all my heart that if I sacrificed enough, she'd see me, choose me, hold me, and say the words I'd never heard. You matter. You're enough. But those words never came, and the years passed. She got stronger eventually, slowly. Her speech improved. She could walk short distances with help, but the damage had already been done, to both of us. She was still the queen of the house, still demanding, still distant, and I was no longer a girl. I was a quiet, exhausted version of something not yet a woman. By the time I was 17, I was numb. The world outside felt like a movie I wasn't allowed to watch. I didn't know how to laugh without guilt. I didn't know how to want something for myself without shame. I remember once, a woman from church offered to teach me how to sew. She said I had good hands, that I could make something beautiful. I was so excited. I stayed up all night thinking about the patterns I'd make. But when I told my mother, she said no. She needed me that day. She always needed me. So I folded the dream and tucked it under my mattress, like all the others. That's the thing about girls like me. We learn early that our dreams don't belong to us. They're luxuries for people who don't have mouths to feed or diapers to change or wounds to clean. I buried every part of myself that didn't serve someone else, and that became my identity. Useful, reliable, quiet. But beneath all of it, something inside me whispered, a voice I tried to ignore, a soft, persistent ache that said, there has to be more than this. I just didn't know what more looked like. I had never seen it. I only knew how to survive. When I found out I was pregnant, I was 21 and working nights cleaning motel rooms off Route 1. The kind of motels where the sheets always smelled like bleach and something worse underneath. Where the walls were so thin you could hear every heartbreak, every lie, every lonely sigh from the next room. I was alone. Completely. There was no father in the picture. Just a one-time mistake. A moment of craving affection that cost me the rest of my youth. When I saw the 2 pink lines on the test, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat on the edge of the bathtub in that cheap little apartment I rented, feeling like the earth had tilted. And then I made a promise. I promised her, because in my heart I already knew it was a girl, that she would never feel the things I felt. She would never feel unwanted, never feel like a burden. She would never look into the mirror and hate what stared back. I promised she would be safe, even if I had to build that safety brick by brick with my bare hands. I started working 2 jobs, days as a waitress in a diner, nights back at the motel. I cleaned up after strangers for minimum wage while growing a life inside me. My belly swelled. My ankles doubled in size. But I never stopped moving, never stopped pushing. The day I went into labor, I was cleaning a bathroom. I was scrubbing around the toilet when my water broke. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I just stood up slowly, changed out of my uniform, and walked the 12 blocks to the clinic. She came into the world at 3:47 a.m. 6 pounds, 2 ounces, big brown eyes that refused to close. I remember thinking she looked like she didn't trust the world yet. And who could blame her? I named her Isabella. Holding her was like holding the sun. Warm, blinding, terrifying. I had never known love like that. It didn't matter that I was exhausted, that I had no family there, no one waiting with flowers or balloons. It didn't matter that the nurse barely looked at me when handing me the release papers. None of that mattered, because I had her. And from that moment on, every breath I took was for her. We lived in a studio the size of a closet. The walls were cracked. The ceiling leaked when it rained, but I kept it spotless. I found joy in folding her tiny clothes, in heating up bottles in the middle of the night, in watching her chest rise and fall while she slept beside me on the mattress we shared. I used to whisper to her in the dark. I'd tell her, "You're going to be someone, baby. Someone smart, someone strong, someone loved." I spoke those words into her ears like spells, like mantras, like promises etched into her soul. I wanted her to grow up knowing what I never did, that she was chosen, wanted, cherished. When she turned 3, I enrolled her in daycare. I cried outside the door for 30 minutes after leaving her. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I didn't know how to be without her. For 3 years, she had been my shadow, my reason, my heartbeat. Walking away from her, even for a few hours, felt like tearing something out of my own chest. But I did it, because I wanted her to learn, to explore, to find her own little voice in the world. Every day after work, I'd rush to pick her up. Her face would light up when she saw me. She'd run into my arms and start talking a mile a minute about paint and snacks and songs. And I'd soak it all in, like medicine, like a reminder that maybe, just maybe, I was doing something right. I remember one afternoon, we passed by a toy store. She pressed her face against the glass, eyes wide at a dollhouse that cost more than my rent. I knelt down beside her and said, "That's for rich girls, baby. But I promise you, I'll give you something better. I'll give you a real home, a real life." She nodded, not understanding what I meant, but I knew. I knew what I was fighting for. I started saving. A few dollars here, a few coins there. I'd keep them in an old coffee can under the sink. It wasn't much, but every penny was hope. Hope that one day she'd have her own room, her own bed, a desk to do homework, a front yard to run in. I clipped coupons, bought secondhand clothes, cut my own hair to save money. There were nights I went to bed hungry because I needed to stretch the groceries. But she never knew that. She never saw the sacrifices, because I made sure she only saw smiles. When she started school, I sewed little notes into her lunchbox, just paper scraps with things like, "You are amazing," and "Mommy loves you more than the stars." I wanted her to feel my love, even when I couldn't be there. At night, I'd watch her sleep and pray over her. I'd ask God to protect her from the world, to keep her soft in a world that would try to harden her, to help her never carry the weight I did. I dreamed of her future constantly, of her in college with books and friends and purpose, of her laughing in bright, open rooms, of her traveling, becoming, evolving. I imagined sitting in the back of her graduation ceremony, holding tissues and trying not to cry too loud. I imagined her saying, "That's my mom. She gave me everything. Every scraped knee, every fever, every tantrum, I carried them all like sacred offerings. She was my life, my masterpiece, the one thing I could give to the world and say, 'Here, look, I made something beautiful.'" But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. She stopped needing my hand to cross the street. She started closing the door when she changed. She rolled her eyes when I reminded her to wear a jacket. "It's normal," I told myself. "She's growing. This is what children do." But the distance kept growing. And one day, I realized she had stopped asking me how my day was. She had stopped looking at me like I was magic. And I was still whispering, still sacrificing, still stretching myself thin. But now, she wasn't listening. It was right around Isabella's 11th birthday when I noticed my mother was forgetting things. At first, it was small, misplacing her glasses, asking the same question twice. I brushed it off. We all forget things sometimes. But then it got worse. She'd leave the stove on. She'd confuse the names of people she'd known for decades. One night, I found her trying to open the front door at 2 a.m, convinced she was late for work at a job she hadn't held in over 20 years. I called her name, gently at first, then louder. She turned and looked at me like I was a stranger, my own mother. Her eyes filled with panic, and she asked, "Who are you?" It only lasted a moment, but it shook something in me that never settled again. A doctor confirmed what I already feared: early onset Alzheimer's. I remember sitting in the cramped office, the doctor's voice explaining the disease in calm, clinical terms. Progressive, degenerative, irreversible. I nodded, pretending to understand. But inside I was falling down a well with no bottom. I was 32 years old, a single mother, and now, again, a caregiver. History has a cruel sense of irony. The very role I had stepped into as a child had returned, like a shadow stretching itself over my life once more. Only this time, I had my own daughter watching me, depending on me. The next few months moved like a blur of doctor appointments, pill bottles, and emergency calls. My mother became unpredictable. Some days she was herself, humming old songs in the kitchen. Other days she screamed at me, accusing me of stealing from her. Once she tried to hit me with a lamp because she thought I was an intruder. And I kept smiling, kept cooking, kept saying, "It's okay, Mama, I'm here." Because what else could I do? I had no siblings to help. No extended family willing to step in. Friends I had slowly drifted from. They had their own lives, their own struggles. I didn't blame them, but I also didn't ask for help. I've never been good at that. So I rearranged my world. I cut back my hours at work. I picked up a night shift instead, so I could be home during the day. I slept in short bursts, in between giving her meds and helping Isabella with her homework. I learned to read the signs of a bad day before they happened. The way my mother's jaw clenched, how her eyes flickered just a second too long when I spoke. I learned how to keep the house quiet, calm, predictable. I learned how to disappear into the background of my own life again. Isabella noticed, of course. She always noticed everything. At first, she'd try to help. She'd hold her grandmother's hand, bring her snacks, color beside her. But slowly, she began to pull away. The tantrums started. The slammed doors, the muttered comments under her breath that she thought I couldn't hear. "She's crazy. Why do we have to take care of her? I hate this house." And each time I'd take a deep breath and remind myself, she's just a child. She doesn't understand. But late at night, when the house was finally still, I'd sit in the bathroom and cry into a towel. Silent sobs, the kind that leave you gasping. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. My face was tired, my body sore, my eyes permanently swollen from lack of sleep. I was aging faster than time could count. And yet, there was no space for weakness, no time for grief. The world didn't stop for women like me. We kept going, even when it hurt to breathe. There were moments I thought about running, about packing a bag and walking away, just disappearing. Not to start over. I didn't even dream of that anymore. But just to stop feeling like a machine that was breaking down one bolt at a time. But every morning, Isabella needed breakfast. My mother needed her medication. The house needed to be cleaned. The bills needed to be paid. So I stayed. One night, I had a fever. A real bone-deep, body-aching fever. I could barely stand. My skin burned and my vision blurred. Still, I got up. I changed my mother's bed because she had an accident. I helped her into clean clothes. I wiped down the bathroom floor. I tried to sit for a moment, just to breathe. And that's when Isabella came into the room. She looked at me with disgust. "Why do you always smell like pee?" she said, her voice cutting. "You're always tired. You're always gross." I didn't respond. I didn't have the strength. I just looked at her, my beautiful girl, and felt something break inside me. Not from what she said, but from what I saw in her eyes. Resentment, embarrassment. She was ashamed of me. I had spent over a decade building a world around her comfort, and now she looked at me like I was the thing she wanted to escape. But I couldn't be angry with her. Not then. Not yet. Because I understood the feeling too well. I had felt it myself once, as a child washing her mother's sheets, wiping her mother's tears, wondering why life had given her a burden instead of a childhood. And now, it was happening again, just from the other side. I started skipping meals more often, to save money, to keep the fridge stocked for Isabella. My clothes became looser, my shoes wore out. I stitched the soles with thread from old curtains. I stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. And even then, it never felt like enough. There's a kind of poverty that's invisible, not just financial, but emotional. A poverty of touch, of care, of rest. I lived inside that poverty like a second skin. And the worst part was knowing that I was raising my daughter inside it too. But what choice did I have? There were no programs, no support. I'd called once, to a center that offered in-home assistance. The waiting list was 2 years long. I hung up the phone and laughed. A bitter, exhausted laugh that sounded more like choking. So I became the center of the wheel. Everything spun around me. If I stopped moving, everything would collapse. I didn't stop. Even when I wanted to. Even when my body begged me. Even when my heart whispered that this wasn't sustainable. That something was going to give. And something did. Just not yet. Invisibility isn't something that happens overnight. It creeps in. Quietly. Slowly. Like water leaking through a ceiling. At first, it's just a stain. Then, one day the roof collapses and you realize the damage was happening all along. You just didn't want to see it. That's what it felt like with Isabella. One day, I was her everything. Her protector, her warmth, her stability. And then, suddenly, I was in the way. An inconvenience. Background noise. It began with the little things. She stopped asking me to walk her to the bus stop. She didn't want hugs when I picked her up from school. She rolled her eyes when I reminded her to say thank you, or please. I brushed it off as normal teenage distance. I told myself it was part of growing up, that she was just finding her independence. But then it got colder, meaner. She would criticize the food I made, complain that her friends had better clothes, better phones, better houses. She'd say things like, "Why can't you just get a better job?" Or, "I didn't ask to be born poor." And I'd stand there, stunned, the sting of those words heavier than anything I had carried on my back. She started spending more time in her room, locked behind a door she only opened when she needed something. A ride, money, a clean uniform. Her eyes no longer met mine. Her tone had lost all softness. It was sharp now, like she was constantly bracing for a fight I didn't want to have. And still, I tried. I asked her how school was. I made her favorite meals. I stayed up late to help her with projects, even after working 2 shifts back to back. I left notes in her backpack, just like I used to when she was little. "I'm proud of you. You are stronger than you think. You are my everything." She never mentioned them, never said thank you. I'd find them later, crumpled at the bottom of her bag, stained with juice or discarded like receipts. My daughter had outgrown me, not just in size, in soul. And somehow, I had let it happen. The house grew quieter between us. Not peaceful quiet, but that dense, uncomfortable silence that fills a space where love used to live. A silence that says, "I don't see you anymore." I started doubting myself, questioning every decision I had ever made. Was I too strict? Too soft? Did I love her too much? Not enough? Should I have taken more time for myself? Did I give her too much of me? So much that there was nothing left for her to respect? But no matter how much I analyzed, the truth remained the same. I was no longer a person to her. I was a service. The woman who cooked, who cleaned, who drove, who paid, who stayed quiet. The woman who stood on the edge of every room, making sure the lights stayed on and the laundry got folded. I was the body that held the house together. But I wasn't Mom. Not anymore. One evening, she had friends over. I had spent the entire day cleaning, scrubbing the kitchen, setting out snacks, trying to make everything feel warm and welcoming. I wore a decent shirt, brushed my hair. I wanted her to be proud of me, even if just for an hour. When they arrived, I smiled and offered to take their jackets. Isabella rolled her eyes and muttered under her breath, "God, can you not act like a maid?" Her friends laughed. Not loudly, but enough for me to hear it. I felt it like a slap. Not because of what she said, but because of how easily it came out of her mouth, how little it meant to her, how used she was to treating me like I didn't matter. I turned back to the kitchen in silence. My hands trembled as I rinsed a glass under the faucet. I held back the tears, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. The laughter in the living room floated through the air like static. I felt so small, so ridiculous, so deeply ashamed of how much I still wanted her to love me. That night, after her friends left, I tried to talk to her. I sat on the edge of her bed and said, "That really hurt me, Issa." She didn't even look up from her phone. She just shrugged and said, "You take everything so seriously. I was joking." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how she couldn't see me. Really see me. I wanted to say, "I'm a human being. I've bled for you, broken for you, given you every ounce of love I had." But all that came out was a whisper. "Don't talk to me like that again." She looked up then, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Not regret, not guilt, maybe annoyance, maybe boredom. "Whatever," she said, and turned away. I stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the times I had defended her when people said she was spoiled or ungrateful, all the times I had wiped her tears and told her she was worthy, beautiful, loved, and how now I was the one crying, and she didn't even care enough to notice. The next morning, I made breakfast like usual. Eggs, toast, her favorite juice. She came into the kitchen, glanced at the food and said, "Did you burn it again?" No good morning, no smile, just another jab. I stood there, spatula in hand, and felt my chest tighten. Something inside me was changing. A part of me, the part that had always been soft, patient, willing to wait for her love, was turning cold. Not from anger, but from heartbreak. It's one thing to be rejected by the world, by strangers, by bosses or neighbors or friends, but to be rejected by your own child, the one you carried, raised, protected, that's a wound that never stops bleeding. I kept moving through the days like a ghost. I went to work. I came home. I took care of my mother, who now barely remembered who I was. I took care of my daughter, who wished I didn't exist. And somewhere in between washing dishes and folding clothes, I started to disappear. No one noticed, not even me. It was on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks before Isabella's high school graduation, that everything cracked. My mother had been having a particularly difficult morning. She had wandered out into the front yard in nothing but her nightgown, confused and cold, yelling for her father, who had been dead for more than 30 years. A neighbor saw her, gently guided her back inside, and called me at work. I rushed home, my heart thudding with fear, only to find her curled on the sofa, rocking herself back and forth like a child. When I touched her shoulder, she flinched, and for a moment, her eyes were wild with terror. I calmed her, changed her clothes, made her tea, sat with her until she fell asleep. My back ached from bending over. My mind buzzed with anxiety. I hadn't eaten anything since the night before, and my hands were shaking. But I pushed through the fog. I always did. I stood up from the couch, barely holding myself upright, when I heard the front door slam. Isabella was home. She walked in, threw her bag on the floor, and rolled her eyes the moment she saw me. "What happened now?" she asked in that voice I had come to dread, drenched in disdain. "Your grandmother had an episode," I said quietly, trying to steady my voice. "She went outside again." "So?" she snapped, shrugging off her jacket. "That's not new. Why are you acting like it's the end of the world?" I stared at her. There was no compassion, no concern, just that endless coldness, that wall she had built so high I didn't even recognize her anymore. "I need help," I whispered. The words tasted foreign in my mouth. She paused, looked up from her phone. "With what?" "Everything," I said, my throat tightening. "Just help. Around the house, with her, with groceries, with anything." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "I already have enough to deal with. I'm not your maid." The word hit me like a blow to the stomach. Maid. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The room spun slightly. I reached for the table to steady myself. She looked at me like I was pathetic, like I was something sticky on her shoe. "You always act like you're some kind of martyr," she said, crossing her arms. "Maybe if you actually did something with your life, instead of playing nurse to a woman who doesn't even know your name, you'd be happy." I don't know what hurt more, the cruelty in her words or the ease with which she spoke them. "You think I chose this?" I said, voice cracking. "You think I dreamed of this life?" She scoffed. "You chose to be weak, to settle. That's not my fault." I felt something break inside me. Not snap, not shatter, just quietly break, like a tree limb giving way under too much snow. I had carried so much for so long, and now the one person I had done it all for was standing in front of me, dismantling every sacrifice like it was meaningless. "I gave everything for you," I said. "I worked 3 jobs so you could have clothes. I skipped meals so you could eat. I walked miles in broken shoes so you could take the bus to school." "So what?" she said. "That's what moms are supposed to do." "No," I said, louder now. "Moms are supposed to love, not disappear." She rolled her eyes again, turned her back, and walked into her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, alone in the kitchen, the ticking of the old wall clock deafening. My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor. I didn't cry. There were no tears left, just an emptiness that felt like a crater in my chest. That night, I didn't make dinner. I didn't fold laundry. I didn't wipe down counters. I sat in the same spot on the floor until the sun went down, and even then, I didn't move. It felt like something essential had left me, like a flame had gone out. The next few days passed in silence. I did the minimum. I went to work, came home, cared for my mother. I didn't speak to Isabella unless I had to, and she didn't seem to notice. I started watching her more closely, not in anger, but in grief. Grief for the girl she used to be, the one who clung to my leg on the first day of kindergarten, the one who begged me to sing her to sleep, the one who used to say, "You're the best mommy in the world." Where had that girl gone? Was she buried under teenage pride, social pressure, resentment she never voiced? Or had I, in my desperate need to protect her from pain, raised someone who couldn't recognize it in others? I thought of the stories I used to tell her, about bravery, kindness, strength. I thought of how I tried to make her believe the world was beautiful, how I wrapped her in warmth even when the cold surrounded us. I thought of how I never let her see me break, and now I wondered if that was the mistake. Maybe she needed to see the cracks, the rawness. Maybe I should have let her see the nights I cried myself to sleep, the days I wanted to give up. Maybe if she had seen the cost, she would have valued the gift. But I had protected her so much. I had made myself invisible. I realized I had become a ghost in my own home, floating from room to room, fulfilling duties, avoiding confrontation, silencing myself for the sake of peace that never came. And all the while, the love I had poured like water into a cup with no bottom. There's a unique kind of grief that comes with being alive and unacknowledged, not dead, not absent, just unseen. And that's what I was, unseen, by my mother, lost in her mind, by my daughter, lost in her ego, by the world, which only saw what I cleaned, what I served, what I endured, never who I was. But deep down, I still believed there had to be more, something beyond this exhaustion, this role, this shell. I had buried so many versions of myself, the student, the dreamer, the friend, the woman, and I didn't know if any of them could be brought back to life. But I wanted to try. The morning I decided to do something for myself, the air felt different. Not because anything had changed in the world outside. The sky was still gray, the dishes still sat in the sink, the coffee still tasted burnt, but because something inside me had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like the soft click of a lock turning from the inside. I had seen a flyer at the laundromat 2 days earlier. Adult GED classes, free, Tuesday and Thursday nights. I remember staring at it while my mother's sheets tumbled in the dryer, my daughter's hoodie wrapped in lint, and something stirred in me, something that had been asleep for a long time. I tore the flyer off the wall and stuffed it into my coat pocket. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know if I'd even go, but I kept touching that piece of paper, like it was a key I didn't know how to use. The day of the first class, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I hadn't worn makeup in months. I didn't have time for vanity anymore. But that night, I brushed my hair, put on earrings, a clean sweater. I looked tired, older than I should have. But there was a light in my eyes I hadn't seen in years. A flicker, a whisper that said, "You're still in there." I left a note on the kitchen table for Isabella. Just a line. "There's food in the fridge. I'll be back by 10. I didn't wait for her reaction. I couldn't. My heart was already thudding too loudly. The classroom was small. Fluorescent lights, cheap chairs, a whiteboard that hadn't been cleaned properly in weeks. But to me, it felt sacred. There were 7 of us, all older than we should have been, all trying to do what we didn't get to do the first time around. A woman named Darlene sat beside me. She was 52. She'd had a baby at 15. Her hands were calloused from cleaning houses. Her smile made me feel safe. The teacher, Mr. Alvarez, didn't ask us why we were there. He just handed out books, looked us in the eye, and said, "It's never too late to start over." I almost cried. That first class was hard. My brain felt slow. Words danced on the page like they were teasing me. But I stayed. I didn't run when I got an answer wrong. I didn't shrink when I stumbled over a sentence. I stayed in that seat, sweating and shaking, and alive. When I got home, the house was quiet. My mother was asleep in front of the TV. Isabella's door was shut. I warmed up some leftover rice, sat at the table, and read through my notes. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself. Not for surviving, not for giving, but for choosing me. The next day, Isabella asked, "Where were you last night?" I told her the truth. She didn't say anything at first, just blinked. Then she shrugged. "You're too old for school." It stung, but I didn't flinch. "I'm never too old to learn," I said. "And you're never too young to understand sacrifice." She scoffed and walked away, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. Confusion, maybe even curiosity. I kept going to class, every Tuesday and Thursday, no matter how tired I was, no matter how chaotic the day had been. I studied in bathrooms, on buses, during lunch breaks. I carried flashcards in my purse. I watched math tutorials on my phone during grocery lines. It wasn't just about a diploma. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. A voice, a future, a name beyond mom or caregiver or doormat. Slowly, my confidence began to rebuild. I started to speak up more, raise my hand, ask questions. I remembered I used to love writing, that I was good at it. Mr. Alvarez once told me my essay made him cry. I had written about the scent of my daughter's baby blanket, how it smelled like milk and lavender, and the end of everything I thought I knew about love. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a woman breaking under weight, but as a woman rising. Then one evening, I came home and found the living room a mess. Dishes unwashed, my mother sitting in soiled clothes. The smell hit me first, sharp, sour, gut-wrenching. I rushed to her, gently cleaned her, changed her, whispered apologies I didn't owe. My eyes burned from holding back tears. I looked around the room. Isabella was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. "You saw this and didn't help her?" I asked, my voice low, shaking. "She's not my responsibility," she said without looking up. My hands clenched. My breath caught. But I didn't yell. Instead, I walked to my room, closed the door, and sobbed into my pillow until my throat went raw. Because in that moment, I realized the hardest truth of all. Sometimes, no matter how much you give, people won't love you the way you deserve. They'll take, and take, and take, until you're empty. And when you finally start to fill your own cup, they'll call you selfish. But I wasn't selfish. I was surviving. The next morning, I wrote a list. Not of chores, not of errands, but of dreams. Simple ones. Buy my own set of bedsheets, take a walk in a park alone, get my GED, go to a movie without checking my phone, read one book a month, take a photo of myself and not hate what I see. Each item felt like a rebellion, a soft declaration that I was still here, that I mattered. Isabella saw the list on the table. She scoffed, rolled her eyes, and said, "You're acting like a teenager." I smiled. Maybe I'm finally meeting the girl I never got to be. The day I walked across that small community center stage and received my GED certificate, I didn't expect a crowd. There were no balloons, no flowers, just folding chairs and a few claps from strangers who, like me, had climbed their own invisible mountains. I held the paper in my hand and stared at it like it was something sacred. It wasn't just a diploma. It was proof that I had survived, that I had reclaimed something life had once stolen from me. Mr. Alvarez smiled and said, "You did it," and I smiled back. But what I wanted to say was, I did it with swollen ankles, sleep-deprived nights, and a heart that never got to heal. I did it while bathing my mother, while being called maid, while hearing silence from the one person whose pride I craved the most. But instead, I just said, "Thank you." On the way home, I took the long route, walking past the bakery that used to tempt me as a child, past the church I hadn't stepped into in years. The sun was setting, casting gold over everything. I didn't feel young again. I didn't feel brand new. I felt something more powerful. I felt real. When I got home, Isabella was sitting on the couch, scrolling as always. My mother was in bed. The TV murmured in the background. I placed the certificate on the kitchen table. Didn't say a word. She glanced at it, then looked back at her phone. No congratulations, no hug, not even a smirk of acknowledgement. But I didn't feel hurt, because the pride wasn't for her. Not anymore. It was mine. That night I lay awake for a long time, thinking about the future. Not just mine, but Isabella's too. I wondered what kind of woman she'd become. If one day she'd remember the way I stood behind her at every school event. If she'd recall the nights I rocked her when she had fevers, the way I whispered stories when the lights went out. Or if she'd only remember the parts that inconvenienced her. I didn't know, and I couldn't control it. But I could keep growing, keep choosing myself, little by little. A week later, I applied for a job at a nearby community resource center. They needed someone part-time to help organize programs, file paperwork, assist with intake. It wasn't glamorous, but it was different from cleaning hotel rooms. It was work that mattered. At the interview, the woman asked me why I wanted the job, and I said, "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible, and I want to help others feel seen." She smiled, told me she'd call me back, and 2 days later, she did. I started working 3 afternoons a week, helping people fill out forms, guiding them to resources, offering them the kind of kindness I had begged for years ago. And every time someone said thank you, every time someone's shoulders dropped in relief, I felt like I was rewriting a page of my own story. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was contributing. One afternoon, a young girl came into the center. She was maybe 17, scared, her face pale and drawn. She said she'd been kicked out of her house, that she didn't have anywhere to go. Her voice trembled when she spoke. I sat with her for over an hour, gave her water, helped her find a shelter, gave her a warm blanket from the donation bin. I didn't give her advice. I just listened. Before she left, she whispered, "You're the first person who made me feel like I wasn't trash." And I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, because I knew that feeling too well. When I got home that evening, the house smelled of microwave popcorn. Isabella was on the couch. The table was cluttered with makeup and empty wrappers. I walked past her, set down my bag, and started heating some soup. My back to her. No words. And then, out of nowhere, she said, "You're not even here anymore." I turned around. "What do you mean?" "You're always gone now. Always at work. Or those classes. Or whatever." I blinked. For a moment, I thought I misheard. "You mean the job I got after I finished my GED? The classes you said were for teenagers?" She rolled her eyes. "Don't twist my words." I laughed. A short, surprised laugh. "I'm not twisting anything," I said. "You just finally noticed what life looks like when I stop sacrificing every part of myself for you." She didn't respond. And for once, I didn't fill the silence. I went to my room and closed the door. Later that night, I sat by my mother's bedside. She was calm, her breath soft. I watched her for a while, remembering when she used to brush my hair with gentle fingers, before everything changed, before life wore us both down. I leaned in and whispered, "I forgive you." It wasn't for her. She wouldn't remember it by morning, but I needed to say it. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of the hope that the past could have been different. I let it go, and something inside me softened. That weekend, I bought a notebook, a beautiful one, with a soft leather cover. I started writing in it every night. Not to vent, not to complain, but to remember, to honor the pieces of myself I was finally uncovering again. I wrote down everything I had forgotten I loved. The smell of rain on hot pavement, the sound of jazz from a neighbor's window, the feeling of warm socks after a cold shower, the way my fingers itched to write stories, poems, anything. And slowly, line by line, I began to piece myself back together. One evening, I came home from work and found something on my pillow. A note. It was written in Isabella's handwriting. Just 4 words. "I'm sorry for everything." No signature, no explanations. Just those words. I held it for a long time, my fingers trembling. It wasn't a fix. It wasn't a miracle. But it was something. And sometimes, something is enough to keep going. It was one of those nights where exhaustion wrapped around me like a second skin. My body ached from weeks of double shifts, sleepless nights, and the constant weight of responsibilities that never stopped piling up. I had just finished cleaning my mother's room, stripping the sheets, wiping down the counters, reorganizing her medications, when I felt it. A sudden dizziness, sharp and unrelenting, like the world was spinning faster than I could keep up with. My hands trembled. My knees wobbled. I tried to steady myself on the edge of her bed, but it wasn't enough. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold kitchen floor, the tiles pressed into my cheek. My body throbbed in every joint, every muscle, every bone. For a moment, panic gripped me. The fog in my mind was thick, confusing. I didn't know where I was, what had happened, or even if I would be able to move. I tried to lift my head. Pain shot through my neck. I tried to call out, but my voice was weak, almost non-existent. My chest felt heavy, like someone had pressed a weight down on it, making every breath an effort. I reached for the counter to pull myself up, and that's when I realized she was there. Isabella, my daughter, standing in the doorway with her phone in hand, scrolling. She froze when she saw me on the floor, but not with concern, not with worry. Just mild irritation, as if my presence was an inconvenience to her routine. "Mom, what are you doing?" she asked, her tone flat, as if she were asking about laundry on the schedule, not a human being who might be dying at her feet. I tried to speak, tried to tell her to call 911, to get help, but my mouth barely moved, and the words that did come out were fractured, unintelligible. My body had betrayed me completely, just as it had many times before from fatigue, from neglect, from the constant pressure of carrying everyone else's needs before my own. For a long moment, she just stood there, looking down at me. I could feel her judgment, her impatience. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant street sounds through the cracked window. The absurdity of it struck me. After everything I had done for her, after all the sacrifices, after years of sleepless nights, I had become invisible, even when I was on the floor, gasping for air. Then she did something I didn't expect. She didn't move closer. She didn't help. She walked past me, muttering under her breath about being late for a friend's party. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the apartment like a hammer striking my chest. I wanted to scream, to demand help, to make her understand the gravity of what just happened. But I couldn't. I could only lie there, feeling a mix of humiliation, fear, and profound sadness. The realization hit me harder than any physical pain I had ever felt, even when I was at my most vulnerable, even when my body was failing. I had no one to lean on, no one who truly saw me. It took several minutes before the neighbor upstairs, Mr. Thompson, heard the commotion and knocked on the door. I remember the sound of his voice cutting through the haze. "Lucia? Are you okay?" Relief washed over me in waves I hadn't known I was capable of feeling. I tried to respond, but the words were still trapped in my throat. He lifted me, helped me to a chair, and called an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly, their calm efficiency a strange contrast to the chaos that had filled my mind. They checked my vitals, loaded me onto a stretcher, and began asking questions I could barely answer. I clung to Mr. Thompson's arm for stability, feeling the fragile thread of my life held together by his concern, not my daughter's. At the hospital, I was diagnosed with extreme exhaustion, dehydration, and dangerously high blood pressure. My body had given out after years of neglect, overwork, and emotional strain. I had been running on empty for so long that my organs were rebelling, my muscles screaming in protest, my heart warning me in silent, urgent thumps that I couldn't ignore anymore. Lying in that hospital bed, monitors beeping softly around me, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, a deep, unfiltered fear. Not just fear of death, though that was there too, but fear of the realization that my life had been consumed by the needs of others, while mine had slipped through my fingers like sand. Isabella never came to see me. My mother slept, unaware of the near disaster that had occurred. I realized then that the people I had sacrificed everything for could never carry me when I fell, that the love I had poured into them so selflessly had not created the safety net I had assumed would be there. As I rested in that sterile white room, I began to reflect on the years leading up to this moment. The years spent cooking, cleaning, caring, sacrificing, hoping. I had thought endurance was strength. I had believed that my selflessness was noble. But here, in the stark truth of my body failing me, I understood the difference between strength and survival. Survival is blind. It keeps you alive, but it doesn't guarantee that anyone notices or cares. Strength is choosing yourself even when the world doesn't acknowledge your worth. I thought about the young girl I once was, the one who had carried her mother's needs on her small shoulders at 13, who had given up childhood to keep someone else alive. I thought about the woman who had carried her daughter's entire world, who had sacrificed her body, her dreams, her sleep, her health. And I realized that somewhere along the way, I had allowed my identity to vanish, replaced by service and duty and invisibility. The beeping of the monitor was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe slowly, deliberately. I wanted to remember this sensation, this moment, because it was a turning point I hadn't recognized at the time. My body had demanded attention, my soul had demanded acknowledgement, and for the first time, the universe, or fate, or whatever power there might be, had forced me to stop. I stayed in that hospital bed for 3 nights. During that time, I allowed myself to feel everything I had been suppressing: the exhaustion, the anger, the betrayal, the grief. I cried without restraint, unashamed, for the girl I had been, for the mother I had tried to be, for the daughter I had raised who could not see me. When the nurse finally helped me back home, I walked into the apartment and felt the weight of all the years pressing down on me once more. The dishes waited, the laundry waited, my mother's needs waited, and somewhere, my daughter waited. But now, something had changed. I had glimpsed what life could look like if I stopped collapsing under the weight of it all. If I allowed myself to exist beyond the service I had so dutifully provided. I knew then, more clearly than ever, that survival alone was not enough. That the way I had lived, giving until there was nothing left, had almost killed me, and that if I was going to continue, if I was going to keep being here for anyone, I needed to learn how to be here for myself first. I closed the door to my apartment behind me, leaning against it for a moment. My body ached, my heart raced, and my mind reeled with the gravity of what had just happened. But deep inside, I felt the faintest spark, a fragile, trembling awareness that perhaps this collapse, terrifying as it was, could also be a beginning. A first step toward reclaiming the life that had been borrowed, stretched thin and nearly extinguished over decades of service and sacrifice. After the incident on the kitchen floor, everything changed. The fear that had simmered under the surface of my life had erupted, demanding acknowledgement. I realized that if I continued living only for others, I would not survive to see another day. My body had forced me to stop, but my spirit, the part of me that had been buried under decades of sacrifice, finally stirred awake. I began small, simple acts at first. I walked to the corner store without rushing. I lingered at the park across the street, watching children play while feeling the sun on my face without guilt. I allowed myself to sit with a cup of tea in the evenings, savoring it rather than drinking it out of necessity while cooking, cleaning, or soothing someone else's pain. These were tiny rebellions, quiet declarations that I existed beyond my duties. Then, one afternoon, I found an advertisement at the community center. They were looking for volunteers to help women who had been abandoned, neglected, or mistreated. I hesitated for a moment, remembering all the years I had hidden my own suffering. But then I walked in, feeling that old flicker inside me ignite into something stronger. The first time I helped a woman at that center, I felt a recognition that I hadn't known I needed. She was older than I was, her face lined with the same kind of weariness I had grown familiar with in the mirror. She trembled as she told me her story, of years spent caring for children, parents, spouses, only to be discarded, ignored, forgotten. I listened. I held her hands. I whispered, "You are seen. You are valuable. You matter." And as she cried, I felt tears slide down my own cheeks, but they weren't of exhaustion or despair this time. They were of release, of connection, of knowing that my experience, my pain, my survival had meaning. I started working part-time there, mornings spent organizing donations, afternoons assisting women with paperwork, evening hours listening to stories I understood better than anyone else. Each woman I helped became a mirror of my own journey. I saw my younger self in them, the girl who had carried her mother's needs at 13, the woman who had sacrificed herself for her daughter, the exhausted body that had collapsed on the kitchen floor. I held them with tenderness, offering guidance, comfort, and recognition. And in doing so, I held myself. One day, a young woman came in, scared and shivering, holding a tattered backpack. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I have nowhere to go, no one to help me." I knelt down, placing a hand on hers. "You're not alone anymore," I said. "I see you, and we're going to make sure you're safe." Her shoulders loosened just slightly, and in that small shift, I felt a surge of hope. The power of simply being seen, of being acknowledged, was transformative. I returned home that evening with a sense of quiet satisfaction I hadn't felt in decades. My mother slept peacefully in her room. The house smelled faintly of the dinner I had prepared earlier. Isabella was in her room, headphones on, oblivious to my thoughts. I didn't need acknowledgement from her anymore. I didn't need validation from anyone else. I was learning slowly that my worth was intrinsic, independent of anyone's approval. I began to invest in myself in ways I had never allowed. I started writing again, filling notebooks with thoughts, stories, poems, fragments of memory I had carried alone for years. I joined a local writing group. The first time someone read my work and said, "This moved me," I felt a warmth I had not experienced since childhood, a recognition that my voice mattered, that my experiences were worthy of being shared. And then, one quiet afternoon, I received a small envelope slid under my door. Inside was a simple note from Isabella. "I'm sorry for how I treated you. I didn't understand. I see now." Her words were brief, yet they cut through the years of pain, a gentle bridge across the chasm that had formed between us. I held the note to my chest and wept, not from sorrow, but from the profound release of carrying forgiveness and love all at once. I learned that healing is not linear. It does not come in grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It comes in small steps, in moments of recognition, in acts of care for oneself as much as for others. I discovered that self-love is not selfish. It is essential. And by embracing my own worth, I became capable of giving, not out of obligation, but from a place of fullness. I began to see beauty in the ordinary again. The soft morning light through my apartment window, the laughter of children in the park, the gentle hum of a neighbor's music floating down the hall. I learned to savor moments of peace without guilt. I laughed freely, without restraint, allowing joy to enter spaces that had long been reserved for survival and service. The woman who once lived only for others, who bore the weight of every expectation, who sacrificed until her body collapsed, had returned. She was stronger, wiser, and tenderer. She had learned to nurture herself as fiercely as she had nurtured others, and in that, I found liberation. I write this not to boast, but to bear witness. To anyone who has spent their life caring for others at the expense of themselves, you are worthy. Your voice, your body, your soul, your story, they matter. Even if the people you've sacrificed for cannot recognize it, even if the world seems blind, you are seen. You are seen. You are enough. I am enough. I carry gratitude in my heart for every challenge, every heartbreak, every moment of invisibility. They have shaped me, not into someone broken, but into someone who understands depth, compassion, and the true power of resilience. I am grateful for the lessons I have learned, for the women I have met who have reflected my own journey back to me, for the strength I discovered in the quietest moments when no one was watching. I am grateful for life itself, for the ability to wake up, to breathe, to choose myself, to rise, and to witness the beauty of living fully, authentically, and without apology. Thank you to those who have loved me, seen me, and challenged me. Thank you to the young girl I once was, for enduring. Thank you to the woman I have become, for refusing to vanish. And thank you to the world for teaching me that even in darkness, light can be found, nurtured, and carried forward. I am here. I am alive. And I am finally free.